So let's talk about economy and war. These two things are extremely connected. You can't have a strong economy if you keep funding a conflict, especially if everything's leveraged to the moon. We have signs that the Ukraine war is draining the West financially and we are moving towards a breaking point. It might come in a few months or a year, but we are moving towards a resolution. We have the West constantly funneling dollars and euros to Ukraine, but it is not enough. Zelensky wants more money, and he's after all of Russia's frozen reserves. Zelensky is insisting on Russia to pay for the aggression against Ukraine, and the target is all the assets trapped in the West. Listen to this: modern Russia does not believe in anything except money and strength. The aggressor must pay the most for his aggression. They must pay with the assets of those who are connected. Now, I know many of you say that the West won't do it, that they won't cross the red line. But if you look at the moves being made, the statements being issued, and the economic situation, it's just a matter of time. During the recent EU and Canada summit, they issued a joint statement calling for Russia to pay for damage inflicted on Ukraine during the war. We also know Janet Yellen and von der Leyen are already on board with the idea as well. And considering the World Bank has put the damage at over $400 billion, Russia's assets will likely get swallowed up whole. But it gets even crazier. The Swiss president has visited Zelensky, and one of the main topics was using the profits made from the frozen Russian reserves. Now, the Swiss only has $8 billion in Russian central bank assets. That is a drop in the ocean compared to what's trapped in the Eurozone. The issue here is Swiss neutrality, especially in their banking sector. Now, if Switzerland joins in and sends all the money to Ukraine, then this is going to hurt their banking sector as well. This goes way beyond just central banks storing money in Zurich. Private banking clients are going to freak out, and the largest fallout to the Swiss isn't going to come from Russia, it's going to come from the Chinese. From the FT, Swiss banks say rich Chinese clients are worried about sanction prospects. The banks are panicking that China is going to pull out their money. This is a no-brainer. If it can happen to Russian money, Chinese money is at risk, especially as US-China relations get worse. Swiss banks are supposed to be neutral, right? But they are shifting closer and closer towards what the collective West wants. And this means Switzerland is nothing special anymore. Money stored there is subject to sanctions in an economic war between China and the United States. According to a bank director, I have statistical evidence that literally hundreds of clients that were looking to open Swiss accounts are not. We are witnessing Swiss banking circling the drain. First, it was the collapse of Credit Suisse, and now they're going to cross the sanctions Rubicon. This will just freak out money from China and collapse the industry. And that's just the Swiss, right? Let's talk about the broader picture now. The amount of backlash will be epic. Firstly, the bulk of Russia's frozen reserves are trapped in Belgium. There's legislation there that legally allows them to tax the profits from the Russian assets and give them to Ukraine. Belgium expects to gather 600 million euros in 2023 and 1.7 billion next year from the Russian assets. That's a total of $2.4 billion worth of money that's heading to Ukraine sooner or later. We're just waiting for the EU to draw up a legal framework and it's a done deal. But what is this going to do to the financial system? This has the potential to shift the entire dynamics of central bank reserves as well as the use of global currencies. This will start from the Western bond markets and cascade all the way down to the dollar and the euro currencies themselves. The problem with seizing Russian assets is the distrust it creates in the financial markets. Central banks, especially in the global south, sees that and they'll start divesting away from euro and US treasuries. By now, we're all familiar with this chart. It shows countries like China selling off their holdings of US bonds. They have gone from $900 billion down to under $780 billion in just 12 months. Beijing's holdings have dropped by $123 billion, but it goes deeper than that. According to the Peterson Foundation, foreign holdings of US debt peaked at 49% in 2011, but just last year it has crashed down to 30%. The amount of foreign US debt holdings will always increase because the global economy is growing. The money supply is growing, so some money will eventually make its way to US bonds. But the big concern here is the proportion, the percentage of bonds held by foreigners. The more that percentage drops, local American or European investors will be holding the bag eventually when the debt bubble explodes. This entire system is just one big game of musical chairs, and by confiscating Russian assets, you're stopping the music, you're waking up the world, you're showing them the real definition, the real meaning of counterparty risk. And let's not forget that Russia has also threatened to counter-confiscate EU assets if Brussels steals Russian funds. They have done it before to Carlsberg and Danone, so it's not an empty threat. And this is just step one. The movement of central bank money out of Western assets is going to accelerate. And if you're not investing in treasuries or euro bonds, there's not much point in conducting trade in Western currencies either. And that leads to trade diversification. In a story from Bloomberg, China and Saudi Arabia signs currency swap deal worth $7 billion. The Middle East is looking to shift their non-oil trade away from the dollar. And it's really no surprise if you add up all the chaos, including the Israel war, the sanctions on Russian oil as well. Trust in the US dollar is slipping away because it's getting weaponized more and more. We can see this big spike up in yuan usage by foreign central banks. It's an exponential growth to nearly 120 billion yuan, and it happened immediately after the dollar sanctions on Russia. This is not a coincidence. Imagine how much more severe this will get once the Russian assets are seized and then given to Ukraine. It could go parabolic. Now, I'm not saying that the dollar will be replaced tomorrow. What I'm saying is that the West is once again inviting trouble by scoring another own goal. The destruction of the Western financial system won't be from Russia or even China. It will be from within. So it's clear as day what the effects are, and it seems that Europe is beginning to regret their actions. In a shocking report, some EU nations are pushing to weaken Russia's sanctions enforcement plans. Brussels is pushing for a ban on re-exporting key goods to Russia, and the punishment will be a monetary fine that will go to Ukraine. And they're pushing back because they still need Russian revenue. The EU still exports nearly $60 billion worth of goods to Russia. This is money many member states need from Moscow. If the EU enforces these export sanctions, the big loser will be the Eurozone itself, and the big winner will be China. Russia will simply shift their business from Europe towards Beijing. They might even buy stuff there at a cheaper price. In other words, with the sanctions, Europe is helping China become an even bigger economic power. That's the big irony of the entire situation. The biggest economic ally of China isn't Russia or BRICS. It's actually the United States and the EU. The West is working very hard to promote the Chinese yuan at their own expense. According to the European Bank for Development, we see a substantial increase in the use of yuan in Russia's imports from China, accompanied by a declining share of the US dollar. In addition, they also see an increase in the use of the yuan as an invoicing currency in third parties. This means fewer transactions are being made in euros or dollars around the world. And this is why we are beginning to hear really interesting stuff circulate around, right? It seems that the West is planning to get Ukraine to end the war. Apparently, the US and Germany are planning to force Zelensky to negotiate by cutting away arms supplies. And this report states how Germany is setting itself the main goal of putting Ukraine in a strategically good negotiating position, whatever that means. If this is true, then it's more or less over for Zelensky. Now, I'm not exactly sure what's happening on the ground, but economically, the EU is in a big disaster. Germany is on the brink of a recession, and European industry is starting to collapse. Everything is going badly for Europe, and they even had a trade deal with Australia collapse. The EU shocked at collapse of trade talks as Australia walks away. The Aussies have accused the Eurozone of being protectionist when it comes to agriculture, and this means less business and trade between the two economies. Europe's decline is accelerating fast. The longer the Ukraine war drags on, the worse things will become. They are no longer competitive. Hey, here's how we know the tides are starting to shift. Just a week ago, the US mission to NATO posted a very suspicious declaration on Twitter. They are talking about supporting Ukraine at a negotiating table when the time comes, as well as setting the conditions for a just, durable, and sustainable peace. This is very interesting because if you're looking for a durable and sustainable solution, you need to talk about territory and the Russian reserves. What will Ukraine be giving up? And what does Russia want out of this peace deal? That's why the end drivers of any conflict at the end of the day are politics and economics. And let's talk about Argentina for a bit because it seems economics is changing everything. Just a week ago, Javier Milei won the Argentina elections and he made a ton of bold promises. But right now, he's doing a big U-turn on everything. Remember dollarization? Well, that is likely not gonna happen. In a stunning update, markets cheer as Milei drops dollarization. It has been just days since he won, and Milei is moving to drop the crazy idea of running to the US dollar. Now, we have said before that Argentina has a ton of economic problems. It stems from the export crisis, and whether they run to the US dollar or even gold, it's not going to be a miracle cure. Almost immediately, Argentina's bonds rallied because investors realized that maybe, just maybe, Milei has woken up. He's about to confront the real problems that are plaguing Argentina, and that revolves around breaking his second promise. Milei has said before that Argentina would no longer work with communist countries, which obviously means China. Well, things have changed and the coin has flipped. Milei realized that you can't just break away from the world's second biggest economy. Milei's softer tone shows just how much Argentina needs China. If Milei wants to save the country and not cry for Argentina, he needs to trade with the Chinese. Cutting them off will destroy Argentina's economy. China is the second biggest trading partner of Argentina, just under Brazil. In Q1 this year, Argentina's exports to China hit $1.2 billion and their imports were almost $4 billion strong. If Argentina were to cut away China, they would lose a big buyer for their soybean exports. And if they stop importing from Beijing, local inflation will soar because China effectively exports deflation through cheaper products, right? But there's also another reason why. Argentina is heavily reliant on Chinese goods because they have a shortage of US dollars. They aren't exporting enough to the world to collect dollars to fund their imports. In short, they are buying more than what they are selling. Argentina has a growing trade deficit with China, hitting almost $10 billion. Argentina is relying on China to save their economy because Beijing doesn't need you to pay in dollars. You can pay in the Chinese yuan instead. Just a month ago, China activated a yuan swap line with Argentina worth $6.5 billion. This helped them exchange a falling peso for the Chinese yuan to import goods back into Argentina. When you compare the yuan in yellow versus the peso in blue, it's obvious which currency is more stable. Versus the dollar, the peso has collapsed by 53% in a year, whereas the yuan has actually gained by 1% against the US dollar. So a yuan swap line is incredibly important for Argentina. It is as good as dollars, especially to access Chinese imports. According to the outgoing Argentine president, every time we went through difficult times, Xi Jinping gave us his support. Now it makes total sense why Javier Milei is doing a U-turn on his anti-China policy, because it's just not feasible. He'll lose a huge market to export to. China will probably cut off the swap lines and Argentina will be cut away from Chinese imports. And if you think Argentina's inflation was bad, just wait until they get cut away from Beijing. We will spike well above 200% because the dollar shortage will become even more deadly and apparent. And that's why I believe it'll take a big triggering event for the Ukraine war to end. You'll most likely take a recession for the West to start negotiations. You'll be the biggest shock to the system that no one expects. All the geniuses at the Federal Reserve and all the banks, they all believe that soft landing is coming. Powell and friends believe that there's a 0% chance of a recession. Economists believe it's below 50%, and Goldman Sachs places the risk at 15%. And if the recession strikes or when it strikes, this will just rock the entire US economy, and Congress will have to make a difficult choice. Do we keep sending Zelensky money or give Putin a call and negotiate? We'll have to prepare for a dangerous 2024 because Biden is still going to get his money. House Republicans believes that new aid for Ukraine and Israel will only come next year. The big stumbling block is the border security part of the bill, but another bond tsunami is coming. This is simply a delay. And if more borrowing pushes the US economy off a cliff, then it's probably the end of the Ukraine war. If the economy collapses, this will give America the ultimate excuse to exit the war. Biden will just follow up Zelensky and say, sorry man, we have to protect our own economy first. We'll pull away our aid until our economy recovers, right? And then the whole situation will be forgotten. And at this point, Biden is just too unpopular to win with a recession while funding Ukraine. He'll lose it for sure. He won't be able to pull that stunt off. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Will Ukraine get Russia's money? And are negotiations coming in 2024? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.